Hi, good evening to you all. I want to welcome you this evening to this beef webinar, which is brought to you by the Advisory Services in Roscommon and Longford. This evening we have two speakers. We will be running for approximately an hour. But I suppose before we start on the presentations, we have a number of important issues that I would like to cover. My name is Sean Doorley and I will be your host for this evening. So first of all, look at a number of issues that I just would like to mention before we get started. Is a very important deadline tomorrow for any farmer who is in the BDGP. All farmers have been given an extension by 1 year, and tomorrow is the closing date for that. So if you haven't yet extended, you must go online yourself on AgFood and submit that extension, or you must ask your advisor or ag consultant to do that for you. The second important thing I just want to mention is it has been recently announced by the Minister for Agriculture that the TAMS2 has been relaunched again for another tranche. The closing date is the 16th of April for this tranche. And TAMS2 is, we'll say, for any farmer who wishes to get a grant for a shed, sheep fencing, animal handling equipment, etc. So that's good news there. The third thing I would just like to mention, any farmers who are in GLAS, and recently they were given an opportunity to extend GLAS by 1 year. Any farmer who hadn't met that deadline on the 31st of December, a letter will be coming to you in the post if you haven't already received it, and you will be given an opportunity to submit that extension again if you haven't done it so far. And you will be given 5 days to submit that extension. So you can do that by emailing GLAS section in Wexford or sending an extension request by post to Johnstown Castle as well. So the details are in that letter that you will have received. And lastly, I just mentioned the BEEP scheme, the BEEP program, which was launched last year, will be relaunched again this spring. It's not, the applications have not yet opened for it, but I will mention it from the point of view that if you have autumn calves and you wish to participate in this scheme, it's important that you weigh those calves prior to weaning. So just keep that in mind if you're intended to apply for that scheme. You might consider weighing those autumn-born calves. So any calf born from the 1st of July 2020 is eligible for that scheme. Okay, so look, we'll move along, and I'll introduce you to the two speakers this evening, and I'll just bring up the speakers there. So look, we have, first of all, this evening, just want to say hello to Charlie Devaney. Charlie will be our first speaker, and Charlie will be covering preparation of your suckler cow for the up-and-coming calving season. And secondly, we're going to have Jerry Craig, and Jerry will be covering planning for the coming year on your beef farm. And we also have here Emer Keane. Emer is Walsh Scholar based in the Castlereagh office, and Emer will be here answering or putting the questions to the panelists. And you are all in a position that you can submit questions. If you look at the bottom of your screens, you will see the Q&A tab, and on that you can type in your questions. Questions will be all answered live by the panelists, and we won't be typing any answers, so you'll just see your own question when you type it in, and we'll be answering them live for you. So look at approximately 20 minutes or less per each speaker, and 10 minutes at the end for questions. And if any of you are on a mobile phone, I'd ask you to have your phone fully charged because we'll be on for up to an hour or so. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on our social media channels for viewing afterwards. And we will send those links up around to you all and send it on to be up on our social media channels. So without further ado, I'll ask Charlie to share his screen there, and we'll hand it over to you, Charlie. And
okay, thanks very much, Sean. And Thanks for everybody that's tuning in. I suppose this is a new way of us working, and it's a new way of going forward.
Just press slideshow there. Journey.
Yeah. 1 second, John.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that okay, Sean?
That's it. Yeah, you have it. Yeah.
So I suppose this is new to us all, but probably one of the, maybe in some ways, maybe one of the better things to come out of COVID, that we can do meetings this way and people can tune in and be in the comfort of their own homes. So without further ado, what I'm going to cover tonight and talk about is the pre-calving management of the suckler cow. And it's just looking at all the aspects of that. And I suppose when you're looking at the suckler cow, I suppose the first thing to mention is you probably don't look at it in isolation a month or 2 months. What you do is you look at it as a complete 12 months. And it's about that cow being as efficient as possible so that you can get the most out of her over that 12-month period, and you can keep her as long as possible around the farm. So we're going to just discuss tonight the 5 points are going to be feeding pre-calving, minerals pre-calving, vaccination against scours, scanning, and a checklist just for calving as what you need for spring for calving down your cows. So the most important thing is to condition score cows. Now we're in the month of January, so we're a little bit behind. But we should have been doing this, say, back November. So when your cows go into the shed, you can condition score them. So the body condition score ranges from 1 to 5. 1 being extremely thin, 5 being extremely fat. So ideally, your cows are coming in off the grass when they've been weaned at a condition score 3. So when they come into the shed, they're at condition score 3. So at that condition, they're in relatively good condition, so they can afford to lose about 0.5 of a condition score by the time they're calving. So ideally they're calving down at 2.5. So I suppose to make some sense of that is that for every 0.5 of a condition score a cow loses, you're in around maybe 40-50 kilos of weight. Now again, the bigger cows will probably lose a little bit more. The smaller cows will probably have to lose a little bit less, but in around 40-50 kilos of weight. And you're saying to yourself, why calve cows down at 2.5 body condition score? Because at that score, they're in the ideal condition. It's as they go up in scores, say 3, 3.5, 4, there's an increase in calving difficulty. At 2.5, when they do calve down, they can afford to lose another small bit again, and it doesn't affect their fertility. If they calve down at a body condition score 2, what will happen is their fertility will be affected afterwards, and they'll be slower going back in calf. So calving down at 2.5 is the ideal. And also there can be a saving if your cows are going in at a body condition score of 3 or 3 plus. There can be a saving in silage because you can afford to restrict them cows a small bit before they calve. But very, very important note, and I suppose something that needs to be noted is that if you're going to either put weight on a cow, if she's a body condition score 2 and there needs to be extra weight put on her by feeding her meal, the most important time to do that, or the time to do that, is the 3rd and 4th month before calving. Don't do it in the last 2 months. And if you have a cow like that is overweight and extremely fleshed, say a body condition score 4, 4.5, the time to lose that weight is 3 to 4 months out from calving. So your cow that's calving down the middle of March, like that weight adjustment should have probably been done during the months May, November, December, early January. So be careful from now on in. If the cow is too fed, too fat, you don't start to try to take weight off her at this stage. The last 2 months before calving, you just maintain whatever condition she's in. So if she's overweight at this stage, there's not an awful lot you can do about it. And the same applies that if she's very extremely thin, maybe body condition score 2, you can't really do an awful lot about it. So if you have a cow that's in around the ideal weight, you should be able to maintain that by feeding 64 to 67 DMD silage to the cow. Now, I suppose as a rule of thumb, ideally you would test your silage. But if you haven't tested it, I suppose, just to give people a guide, now I'd say use this with caution because it isn't always, it can vary from farm to farm. But if you're, say, don't graze your ground in the springtime, take up your silage, cut at the end of May, and you've old type pastures, you're probably looking at in around 70 DMD silage. Cut the middle of May, you probably can guess at 65. Sorry, the middle of June, you probably can guess at 65. The end of June, you're in around 60. And for people that have that traditional hay meadow and gloss, once you go past July, you're probably looking at 60 DMD or less. So that's what you're dealing with when you're feeding your cows. But without a test, I suppose you can't be sure. But around here in general, probably our silage is poor to average, which kind of suits a suckler cow system. The thing to note there is, we mentioned it already, that if you overfeed the cow in the last 2 months, the calf puts on 90% of its weight in the last 3 months of pregnancy. So if you overfeed the cow at that stage, you're going to cause calf difficulty. So the calf will get too big. He'll put on too much weight. The same applies with the cow. If you overfeed the cow, and if she's overfleshed, she'll have a lot of fat in around her birth canal, and it'll be harder for her to calve. So I suppose the important thing to note there is that you cannot starve calf difficulty out of a cow. You can't, it just can't be done. So if you decide to feed straw, which I've seen people do in the past for the last month or 2 months before calving, what will happen is there won't be enough protein being fed to the cow, so that will have issues with the calf when he's born. The cow will end up in an energy deficit, and also it may lead to the calf being a bit lifeless after the cow calves. So the ideal time, if you're trying to just wait, is a 3 to 4 month period before calf, not in the last 2 months. And I suppose the most important thing is, but again, it's probably looking forward rather than looking backwards, you need to use easy calving bulls. Very, very important. It's the biggest thing to reduce stress, to reduce work around calving time, and it will always lead to easier calving. So using easier calving bulls on both your heifers and your cows can have a huge influence on how hard that calving season can be. Another point to note, and I suppose this is very topical at the moment and very relevant, is feeding minerals to cows. You're at the ideal stage now to decide, do you want to start feeding minerals to your cows or not? So there's a couple of options. You can use the bolus option, you can use loose or powdered minerals, or you can use a lick bucket. If you're using loose or powdered minerals, you start about 6 weeks before the cow is due to calve. So about 6 weeks out is the ideal time. You're given roughly about 100 to 120 grams per cow per day, but always check the label and see what's on the different labels or what's recommended for that particular product. But normally about 100 to 120 grams per day. I suppose the issue with the powdered or loose minerals is they're very good. They're if you get the right product, but the issue is they're more labor intensive. What you notice sometimes when you start feeding them, the cows might be slow to eat them at the start, but normally after a week or two, if you sprinkle them on the silage, they usually do get into it. So maybe no harm to start even 6-7 weeks before calving to give them that little bit time. But the benefits in most cases are huge, because a lot of the time our cows have been fed poor to moderate quality silage, and maybe the minerals mightn't be at the level they should be in the silage. So you're getting that kick, and when the calf is born, it's leading to a lot livelier calf at birth. But it's also meaning that when she goes to calve, she's actually better able to calve as well by getting the minerals. A bolus can be used as well, and these are normally given 8 to 10 weeks before calving. Again, check the label. Some of them use 1 bolus, some 2. Again, I suppose a couple of little things to remember here is the 12 hours before you give it, try and fast the cow that she has an empty stomach, because the boluses will stay out better in that case. The other thing to watch is that the boluses can be very handy from work point of view. Once they're given, they're given. You're not conscious of having to go back putting minerals on the silage every time. So they're very handy from that point of view, and can work quite well as well. And the other one we mentioned up there was lick buckets. Again, just with lick buckets, be a little bit careful. There can be mixed results. Some cows lick them a lot, some cows don't. So it can be a little bit variable, more so than anything else. And something that I heard recently as well is that a farmer of my own, when you're using lick buckets, badgers actually tend to like them a lot and come and lick them. So it's something just to be conscious of if you have them in the shed or around the yard. So vaccination against scour, I suppose, again, at the ideal time now to be considering or thinking about it. So ideally you vaccinate the cow 12 to 3 weeks before she's due to calve. There's different products out there. Some of them use 1 injection and some use 2. So what they protect against rotavirus, coronavirus, and E. coli. Now, I suppose the important thing to remember here is that, first of all, if you're going to do it, make sure it's in that 12 to 3 weeks before calving. And I suppose for a farmer that has a very spread out calving pattern, that can be tricky, because if you have 1 or 2 cows calving, say every month, it can be hard to target what's the exact right time for doing each cow, and you might have to do a number of cows over a period of time. For a very compact calving, it works out very well. It's very easy to to see and know when you give that vaccine, because usually the cows will calve down in a couple of months. But for the majority of farmers that are calving over a long period of time, it's important to make sure that the vaccine is given at the correct time. But what you notice from the next slide is that it does protect against some of the problems of scours, but it doesn't protect against cryptosporidium. So what you need to watch is that when you're given this, and you might say, well, what's the point giving it if it doesn't protect against crypto? But what you find is that even if the calf does get sick and does get crypto, what you've got to remember is that in a lot of cases, if a calf gets one form of scour, there can be 2 or 3 other forms of scour there at the same time. So by giving the vaccine, you're eliminating most of the other ones, and you only have to concentrate mainly on crypto in most cases. So it's easier to treat with Holocure or whatever after when the calf is born, and you can keep it easier under control. So just that's the advantage of getting it. Again, Salmonella, it's a separate injection that has to be given pre-calving, and that can be used as a vaccine as well. I suppose the one thing we'd always like to say or always like to note here is that on your own particular farm, if you're going along and everything is fine and you haven't had issues with scour, well then you might say, well, what's the point of vaccinating? And I'd agree 100%. So I suppose the bottom line there is if it's not broken, don't fix it. So if your farm, maybe a small herd, spring calving, haven't had issues with scour, keeping very, very hygiene up to a high standard, well, then there may be no need to vaccinate. If you're somebody else that has always used vaccinations and feel that they're part of your farm, well, then it's important maybe to keep doing that. And I'd always ask my vet or speak to my vet about it and ask, what you think is appropriate to your particular farm. But definitely big herds that are calving in the springtime with large numbers, important maybe to definitely consider it and see, is it suitable or do you need to use it on the farm? Scanning, and I suppose you might say, what's scanning doing in on this? It's a bit late to be talking about scanning at this stage. But I suppose what I found is from dealing with farmers and my own clients is that a lot of time a farmer will say to me, the scanner scanned the cows, but the dates were all wrong. But I suppose what you need to emphasize here is that from the time you let the bull out of the cow, you would ideally be scanning your herd about 4.5 months later in a compact calving system. So the correct dates are important, but if your scanner comes in and he's scanning maybe at 5-6 months after that cow is inseminated, very hard to get a correct date at that stage. So important to remember, if you're doing scanning, it's something I would recommend in all herds to do it maybe late summer, early autumn in a spring calving herd, so you're getting the most from that data. Always be a bit wary if the dates are a little bit off, and this is something I'll emphasize probably in the rest of the presentation. Good observation is hugely important. You're observing the cows at all times and always expect the unexpected. If you're doing AI, double check your AI records to see what bull the cows are in calf first of all. And secondly, where there's repeats, I'd always say just be careful. Sometimes a cow might have shown up as a repeat, but may not have been a repeat. So double check that you have your records correct, because there can be false heats. And just keep an eye on, I suppose, from now on, especially with say in a slatted shed, what you'll find is you're looking in on the top of the cows all the time. You're not looking in from the back. So go around them sometimes, walk through the yard as much as possible and check and see that there's no sign of them getting loose around the vulva or coming close to calving. Twins is something that a lot of farmers get caught out on. When they have the cow scan, might show up there's no twins in the cows. But what is actually happening is if you don't do your scanning between, say, a pregnancy, the second and between the second month and the fourth or 4.5 month of pregnancy, you may not be able to detect the twins at that stage, and you may think you've no twins in your cows. So again, walk through the cows at all times and check to see, is there any evidence that maybe a cow is going to calve a little bit earlier? Because with twins, they will. So keeping a vigilant eye at all times. A bull or heifer, again, if you're scanning usually between the second and fourth or 4.5 month, you will pick up whether it's a bull or a heifer. This is very useful information. From anecdotal evidence, you'll find that a bull maybe they bring a little bit longer. Plus, a bull may tend to be a small bit bigger than a heifer. So if you know there's a heifer or bull coming, it gives you a good idea of how you can deal with that with that at birth. And as I said earlier on, always expect the unexpected. What you notice with farming, what I've always seen is that every year something will catch you out, or something different will happen that you hadn't thought of. So be ready for the unknown or the unexpected. So a calving checklist. I suppose at this stage, this is the ideal time to be doing this. We've already discussed vaccinating against gower, which is a useful thing to do. But cleanliness and keeping pens cleaned at calving time is hugely important. So cleaning out your pens and disinfecting them, hugely important before calving and during calving. And if you were probably to take nothing else, maybe from the call tonight and my talk, I suppose what I'd be saying is lime, hydrated lime. I've had there's been brilliant evidence that has worked very well on the demonstration farms in Teagasc. So sprinkling it all over when you have your bed, clean it out, put it on the concrete floor. You can put it on the straw, in on the slats, and I wouldn't spare it. It helps to dry the place up. It's hugely important. Dry cow minerals, we've discussed them already. Beestons, colostrum, I suppose very, very important to have a good supply here at all times. The obvious places, go to your local dairy farm, but always trying to go to a dairy farm that that what you're getting is a good product. So call to a dairy farm that you know what you're getting is a good product. And on the vaccination, I suppose when I am mentioning colostrum is that you can vaccinate your cow, but if the calf doesn't get any colostrum from that cow, or if the cow has no colostrum to give her, that vaccination actually, it doesn't transfer when the cow is pregnant. It only transfers when the calf sucks that colostrum from the cow. So that's something to be aware of as well. So you'd always like to get some part of the colostrum from the cow that you're calving. And if you're getting some from another source, so be it. But trying to get it from a reliable source where you know there isn't a huge amount of disease or infection. Calving cameras, I suppose, again, no more than the lime. I think these are probably one of the greatest inventions, I think, in the farm in the last number of years. The ease of mind, even at night, you can get up, flick the camera on, and you can see whether the cow is ready to calve or not. There's other forms of sensors that can be used there as well. So all these are of benefit and are greatly useful when you're calving down your cows. Calving gloves, because again, as we said, when you're looking at the cow, you're looking at it over a 12-month period. You're not just concentrating on the 2 or 3 months. Everything is going over the 12 months. So by using gloves, you're meaning that cow has less chance of getting infections along with the calving lube, and she's a better chance of coming back in calf. Calving jack, I'd always say have at least 2 sets of ropes. You don't know when you go pulling a calf, will one of the ropes break? So you have 2 sets of ropes to pick from at all time. Iodine, I suppose it also has been recommended to put iodine on a calf navels. Again, a bit similar to the vaccination. I'd say whatever you're doing on your farm and if it's working, I'd say don't change it. Iodine, I know on some farms people find to get very poor results from it. And you can use chlorhexidine as well, and that'll help to dry up the navel. But if you're using iodine, always using clean iodine. But what I would say is keeping the bed straw, plenty of straw. But iodine, it may work on some farms, but being conscious of it when you do put it on the navel, that the cow has a tendency to lick it off. Stomach tube, always have one available. Electrolyte, I suppose, because if calves get sick, that you always have an adequate supply of electrolyte there to give them. Adequate tags, that when the cows do start calving down, that they're not panicking, ordering tags and maybe waiting 3 or 4 weeks for them to come back, that you can tag your calves relatively quickly and get your BVD samples and results back as fast as you can. A thermometer.
2 minutes there, Charlie.
Okay, thanks, John. A thermometer as well, just if you have a calf that you're worried about, that you can measure the temperature on the calf. A warm box, would say, for putting a calf into. An infrared lamp as well. And one thing I'd say about the infrared lamp is always have a spare bulb around. Cow calves at 2 or 3 o'clock in the night, again, like your colostrum, the last thing you want to be doing is trying to go on to find a lamp or find colostrum at that hour and maybe annoying someone. Cows are clean, so trim the tail, trim the back, so that there's no extra dirt or that on the cow when the calf, and even for your own self. And again, straw, the more than lime, you can't overemphasize it. Keeping plenty of straw bedding. And don't be afraid. You'd often see a big pin when there's a cow calf, and you see a bit of straw thrown up in the corner. And for some reason, they think the calves are going to go up and lie in that bit of straw. Have the bin very well bedded down, so when you kneel down, that you're not getting wet on your knee. Proper lighting, make sure your bulbs are in place at this stage. And a disinfectant tub, so that when you walk onto the farm, you can always, or a farmer comes in, they can dip their wellies. So just to wrap it up, or just conclusion, I suppose, get organised now and have yourself in a good place going into calving. It just helps to reduce the stress, have a bit of help organised or lined up, Have all your important phone numbers there for your vet and that. And finally, as a farmer, I think have a health check there in place before you go calving, because it can be a very stressful time. And lastly, stay safe. If you're handling calves or in around cows, never ever handle a calf and the cow beside you, because even the quietest cow, once a calf loose, there's a danger she'll attack you. So looking forward to some of your questions, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay, thank you, Charlie, for that. And I'll just ask you to stop sharing. That's great. Look at as Charlie says, if you have any questions, you can type those questions in on the Q&A tab, and keep those questions coming in as you think of them, and we'll get them all at the end. So next, now I'm going to ask Jerry Craig to share his screen, which he has, and you can just start slideshow there, Jerry, and then you can start.
Okay, Sean, I hope voice-wise we're okay. Just first of all, I'd like to say Happy New Year to everybody there. And listen, thank you for joining us. A good turnout on the presentations. We have a good lot to go through here on these slides. It's just essentially what I'm dealing with is farm planning. The intention this evening is just to run across a number of issues in it in relation to it's the right time of the year. First of all, the purpose of having the plan will cover, then laying out the plan itself, how you go about it, and then setting annual goals and objectives. I suppose once you have that done, then just practically implementing it, and finally then just evaluating and measuring it. And the key thing with any of these plans is they're all grand written on paper, but unless you measure them and evaluate how you do afterwards is the key message with it. I'd just like to say on that you know, if you look at farming systems in general and our beef systems overall, the dairy thing is going reasonably well, but our beef enterprises are sort of struggling a little bit. And it's like every system, you know, you get a rapid improvement, you get guys focused, and you get big improvement. But everything is cyclic, and you know, cultures in general and farming in general, unless you're proactive at actually improving things, you know, you end up getting into decline. So really what we're looking at is guys to think about what they're at a little bit more, and this is the time of the year for doing it. Obviously, you know, we've heard all about the beef price pressure and Brexit and everything else that's going on there. They've held up reasonably well, and you know, the Brexit outlook doesn't look that bad. The dependence on direct payments is obvious out there. You know, it's very important to be, you know, generating as much money as you can from direct payments. But I think the key aspect of it is that, you know, to be proactive in terms of improving your income and making decisions round about that. I think a key area that we learned over the last number of years is that the importance of, and we've spent a lot of time involved in football and everything else, you know, the importance of actually being surrounded by positive people, and people that have a positive outlook is very important. And we've seen that with the discussion groups, you know, probably this year because of COVID and everything, they sort of slipped away a bit. But I suppose the key thing is that if you can be like-minded people that's thinking in a positive way, it has a big effect. I know with Christy and Joe Murray over the years working with them, and you know, a key factor in the whole thing is that, you know, if you start worrying about the neighbour effect, you know, people don't like to put their head above the pulpit, and if they do, it's usually cut down fairly quickly. But you know, you need to take chances and take risks a little bit to improve what you're actually doing and challenge yourself a little bit on where you're going. I would say that in terms of the winter that we're in, a terrible year from a COVID point of view, or 2020, where we have a few weeks where we're locked up, and within that there's a huge opportunity to actually, you know, sit down for a few hours and draft out where you are and where you intend going for the year ahead in terms of your farming business. I suppose there's a range of people on the call probably at the moment, and depending on what age or where you're at in terms of life and what, you know, how significant farming is for you, if you're off farm income. I think the key thing that we have to look at is farming a way of life for you, or is it a business? And you have to decide that really before you start. If you're going to look at it as a way of life, you can reduce down, you can draw all the premiums and subsidies you want and move that direction. At the other end of things, if you're looking at a business and in a position that you can turn a few pounds at it, these are the key things you need to be looking at. And if you just look at where you're at the moment, are you working on the planned and a structured way? Right? Have you a plan for 2021 going forward? And look back and sort of say, listen, what did you achieve the last 3 years or the last 5 years? What progress have you made? And the other side of that thing, you know, what measure, okay, everyone will admit that they made progress. No one will deny that they sort of didn't improve. But the key thing is, what measures have you and how can you prove to yourself that you actually made that progress? And finally, then I suppose, an analysis of how the farm is performing compared to others. And I suppose, the green acres, the better farms, that whole programs gives you an idea, and the research farms give you a sort of a guide on where you should be working and what's achievable. Ultimately, it's how you approach the business in terms of looking and planning going forward will ultimately decide the profitability for the next 3 years. I think from the word go, going back to Joe Murray and the original Better Farm program, Justin McCarthy had sold the idea of the Donegal concept. And essentially the Donegal concept was that if you have to identify your destination before you start. So the first part in the planning process is to decide where your destination is. And your destination is essentially, and then you form a roadmap round about it. And the Donegal concept essentially saying that if you want to go to Donegal, that's your destination. You have a roadmap from, if you're traveling from Boyle, you're going through Sligo, you have to meet Bundoran and Ballyshannon on the way. And if you end up going to Athlone or going to Carrick, you're going the wrong direction, and you have to be aware of that. Similarly, when you're farm planning, you start 3 years ahead and work backwards. And each year then you plan individually. So a simple farm plan then for 2021, how do you go about it and how do you put it in place? So timing, first of all, is critical, and it's obviously these 2 or 3 weeks when you're sitting around, no pubs open, and every opportunity to go out there and sort of sit down for a few hours and decide what the hell you're doing and what direction you want to go and what do you want to achieve. Then at the end of the year, to sit down in December again before the Christmas dinner and decide what you've achieved and how you performed overall. It's the 2 things that I want on any plan. It needs to be written and simple. And Albert Reynolds, when I started in Longford, gave a presentation once, and he talked about the A4 page. And essentially, it's the A4 page, a single page written back and front, 2 written pages with a plan for where you're going, with 6 or 8 achievable goals identified. And that's what you essentially want to do in the next week or 10 days, and look and see where you're going. And the most important thing is that they need to be measurable goals, all right? That you can have some way of quantifying how did you do or how did you perform, and then you'll make progress. Okay, so the most common tool around any yard is a grape, and I think it's the best way to describe. You can call it a manure fork or a grape or whatever you want to call it, right? But essentially, what you have every day, you pick it up, and every time you pick it up, you can think of this slide. And I think this is very important. There are 4 prongs on the grape, and they're all equal length. And if you have any of those prongs broken, you will not be able to make any progress. So if you're graping silage or grape manure or whatever you're doing, at the end of the day, if the tooth of the grape or the prong of the grape is broken, you're not able to lift anything. Similarly with this, if you look at the 4 headings here in terms of a farm plan is made up of these 4 headings. You have a grassland plan, you have a breeding plan, a health plan, and a financial plan. And if you put a plan together without covering the 4 areas, ultimately you won't make the progress on the top if any of those are broken or not working. And just simply to draw it up in terms of your 6 or 8 objectives, all you need to do is to identify 1 or 2 aims for the year ahead for 2001 under each of those headings. And to help you with that, I'll just run through a few. Okay, so the grassland plan, just quite simply, fundamentally the cornerstone, and you have been handed a farm of land or given a farm of land or bought a farm of land, and all that land essentially is dependent on the soil that's in it. And the soil is the cornerstone of the whole farming business that you're running. And ultimately, it's to know and understand what the position is with the soil that you're farming. And, over the discussion groups over the years, we always use this example of a bucket. So here you have a bucket, Cooper's barrel or Cooper bucket, and there's a hole in the side of it. The hole in the side of it is the limit. So no matter how much water you put into the bucket, it's never going to rise above the level of the hole. And it's similar in this case in terms of your pH and lime, in terms of your phosphate, potash, or even sulfur and dry weather. They are the limit, they're ultimately going to put a limit in terms of your soil. So you need to know where those soils are. So the majority of people maybe on the call maybe joined GLOS 4 or 5 years ago and took soil samples. How much since measurement have you improved, and how have them soils done since? And it's very important to find out that position again. So soil sampling is the measure that you need to know where the hole is in your bucket, and then you correct the hole. You can patch that hole if you know where it is. Secondly, then, in terms of the grassland side of things, is the silage quality. And of course, this is one that we've trashed out for 40 years roundabout, and I see a huge issue with it that we never really tend to move forward in terms of improvement on this. If you talk to the contractors, I'm sure there's a few of them in the call, the busier week of the year is from the 6th or 7th of June on. Now, we work in an area where there's a lot of suckler cows, and obviously people are worried about calving difficulties and everything else. But the key area I think we should be looking at is that it's a big cost in terms of making silage. If you're making silage, why don't you make good silage? And if you look at from mid-May on, because of heading date on grasses, from mid-May on, you make excellent silage, or around mid-May, you make excellent silage. Once you go on past the 20th of May, you're getting down to the good side of things. Once you go beyond June 6th, you're getting into very poor quality silage. And this is a key area. It's okay if there's cows on the farm, but a lot of the farmers and a lot of people on the call that have cows also have young cattle. And just you have to buy the production or make up all the difference with meal, and it's a huge cost. So how do you plan for making better silage? Simply, one of the key issues of the whole of the bucket of white grasses and grown on white silage isn't coming in time. People are waiting for silage to bulk up, largely on the basis that probably phosphate levels or potash levels are low, but usually it's a phosphate level that's an issue. The most important date in the year for you going forward, take the calendars at home and mark it. It's April 1st is the closing up date, and 6 weeks later is the 20th of May is when you target. You have a bit of flexibility either side for weather, and you can see last year anyone that got in before the end of May made great silage. Anyone after that struggled to make good silage. And then the key point, if working backwards again, from the 20th of May back to the 1st of April, and again, if you can graze that sward before you take it up, makes a huge difference. So rather than having cattle in the sheds getting poor performance, if you can get light cattle out and graze that ground before the 1st of April, it's a huge help. So the bottom line, we weren't running off our feet today. This year taking silage samples, I think there was 10 or 15 silage samples taken. People are using sort of independent co-ops and everything else. People selling meals take samples, that's 100%. But the bottom line is you want a true measure of what quality silage you're making to make sure you improve it. The next area then is obviously grazed grass, and I know over the years in groups we've focused on this. The dairy guys have left us way behind in terms of this end of things. I suppose we've done a bit with pasture base over the years, and guys with plate meters measuring grass, there's 13 or 14 of them out in the countryside there. We haven't got that many figures for the guys that are sitting at home watching them, and they're sitting in the cupboard. They haven't been used that much lately. But I think the key area is that when guys were using them, they were growing 14 tonne of grass. The average beef farmer in this area is producing 7. So you get away with half the land and half the land fertilized if you can grow that amount of grass and, carry it, double the stock with it. So listen, it's a big area that we need to focus on and some sort of a plan in terms of that. Keep it simple. More divisions, more fields. The more divisions, the more fields you have. In those fields, if you can put a water trough in the middle and divide it up with tapes and pigtails, is every bit as good as big fences. The other thing with it is that there's solar panel fences now, and for out blocks and bits of land besides, it's a huge opportunity to fence. On the other side of things then, the key thing is that, you let animals onto a block of land for 3 days and they graze it for 3 days, and then it's rested for 18 days. You need grass to grow grass, and if you leave an 18-day rotation in between the time they leave and the time they come back, you improve the quality of the grass and the performance. Again, water and infrastructure, very cheap. Water drinkers at 150. Couple of rolls of pipe goes a long way in it. And the other thing, infrastructure, we're not talking about huge fencing, we're talking essentially about electric fence and even temporary fences. For the honour student then on the calls or whatever, there's 60 years of progress made on grass breeding, every bit as much as in cattle breeding, even a lot more. And how many people have used that progress? In terms of the grasses, they grow earlier, they grow later, and also they grow at twice the rate. And still people haven't decided to use them and move that direction. So reseeding is a big area that we could focus on. The other thing is the role of clover for people that want to reduce down, use less nitrogen, looking at the carbon emissions and looking where we're going in terms of greenhouse gases. Clover is going to be the biggest thing in the next few years coming through, along with the low slurry. So, there's 100 kilos of nitrogen per hectare to be saved by not spreading nitrogen from May on, but using clover to produce that nitrogen, which fixes itself. Okay, so what are the measurements you want in your grassland side of things here? The number of paddocks grazing and the number of fields, the amount of times you graze them. So under the Graze 10 program, we're looking at people at the very best in the things grazing the paddock 10 times. The average beef lad, a good lad is grazing it 8 times. And some guys are only getting 5 or 6 grazings out of a field or between cutting and grazing. So they're key things. Pasture base is there for the guys that's really focused. And maybe if there's anyone interested in the call, even to take up those plate meters that's not being used and focus on it, they really want to do grassland well, you have to measure grass to utilize it well and really do well. The other side of things, and the biggest improvement in the last 10 years in this part of the world, is the availability of scales. All over the years, people for 12 or 1300 to invest in a scales, most people couldn't afford it and wouldn't stretch that far. Due to the beef scheme, it has been available for €50 in the town and villages all around the countryside. And as a result, if you take a look at it from, for €250 cost to go in and get your scales and weigh your cattle 5 days of the year, gives you so much control in terms of performance and how you're performing and how your grassland management is going, and also in terms of quality of silage that you're making. Okay, so that's the first thing, the grassland side of things. Next is the breeding. Tremendous farmers on the call here. The best cattlemen in the country, some of them is on the call listening at the moment. But the best people to breed cattle in terms of quality, huge focus on huge focus on the quality of the cow, and again on the beef end of things. And we're producing some of the best cattle in the country. Okay, there's a 90% focus on that. There's 10% then of a focus on the critical measures. And I suppose we're blessed with ICBF. We're privileged in this country as compared to lots of countries around the world to have all the data that we have from ICBF and ICBF's role. €60 on the top right-hand corner of the screen, you have Herd Plus. You get all these information and measures for your old farm, and you should use it. Okay, the first thing in terms of these four headings here, 4 guides and 4 that you have to plan around about, is just to be clear on that. If you're, God forbid there be lads on the call that would be actually not registering the calves on time and delaying registration, or for whatever reason they forget to do them or whatever, well then all this information becomes slightly useless. Okay, so you're only cutting yourself if you're not sort of registering the calves. It takes a bit of an adjustment if you haven't been doing it exactly right. So that's something that to be looked at, but there is huge knowledge here on where you're going. Instead of focusing on the breeding side, in terms of focusing on the breeding later on, the key thing that you need to look at is that if we look at calving interval, there's 365-day calving interval. The national average is 407. Where are you in relation to that? If it's 407, how do you change it? The calf per cow per year, 0.95 is the target. And again, within an awful lot of the farms here, it's around 0.85 and back to 0.80. You can either blame the bull or blame the man, but you have to need to look at which is the cause of the problem. If they're too hard calves, they're going to go back and calf, and what Charlie was talking about early on is critical. Otherwise, it's management, it's the man's fault. Calving spread target of 9 weeks. Again, there's a lot of people in the country that have 300 cows and they have them calved in 9 weeks. And then there's a lot of men on the call that maybe have 20 cows and calving them in 8 months. And again, fellas might smile about that, but how can you manage a system? And what Charlie is talking about, calving and feeding minerals, when you have cows calving stretched throughout the year. So again, a key area for improvement. And again, the last one on the breeding side of things is heifers calved at 24 months. If you want to calve them at 24 months, you have your weighing scales and you target the weight gain. You need them 90% calf at their body weight, mature body weight at calving, and then 60% on work. The first winter feeding them is the key area where we fall down. On the animal health side of things, a massive change coming down the road. This is a big change that most people probably don't even realize is going to happen. I listened to a presentation on antimicrobial resistance from Mr. Hanrahan beyond, the consultant in Galway Hospital. He has a huge problem with breakdown and resistance in antibiotics in humans, and people not able to get out of sick that he's not able to treat because the antibiotics breaking down. The EU, from a veterinary side of things, are making a big change next year, and they're going to reduce down the availability of antibiotics. Okay, so you won't have the same options. So how can you improve that? You can sit down with your vet and have a look and see how you can improve, and reduce the incidence of disease on the farms. Animal Health Ireland have a great series of leaflets and videos there, tremendous stuff on parasite control and everything. Again, look into Animal Health web page and look and see where you're going. From your point of view, the nutrition is critical, management and the housing. Ventilation around housing and the management around housing is a key area. The roles of vaccines, Charlie has fairly well covered on the calf side of things. The pneumonia vaccines, we're not doing it well enough, and we could focus on that. That'll mean that we won't have to need as much antibiotics. And the measures on your own farm in terms of this health plan on that leg of the stool is the measure in terms of mortality. Why are the cattle dying if you're losing calves? And secondly, then morbidity is the treatments that you're applying on the farm. So over the last 3 years, what have you been treating your cattle for? And if you're losing calves or losing performance, well, then you need to identify what's causing the problem. Finally, on the last, the financial side of things, this is the one that everyone avoids. This is the elephant in the room. No one wants to look at this. You couldn't get a profit monitor out, guys, nearly for love nor money. Is your enterprise making money? That's the key. You have to maximize direct payments. You have all those schemes, DPS, ANC, GLAS, BDGP, Beam, Organics. Look at the amount of money that's been thrown at the beef side of things. How is your enterprise working besides? How much money are you making besides? And the only way you're going to identify that is looking at Profit Monitor. Using tax accounts that were done last December or last November, is a year behind. It's 2019. You can get a Profit Monitor, you print it off your dry stock input from ICBF, and you can sit down tomorrow and face into doing that, okay? But we're not focusing well enough on it. Finally, the bigger scale of things for a lot of people on the call, family communication, and this is a very important slide. Any problem, big or small, within a family, always seems to start with bad communication. And that essentially comes down to someone isn't listening. And that's the lead in I have for the next slide, which is, the ability to listen and to hear what's going on. And there was a very good webinar before Christmas. It's copied and it's there available to you. The last thing I'd say on your plan is that you do need to look at where you're going, planning where your succession is going. No matter how young you are, you should make a will. You never know what can happen, or an accident, or what can turn around about. Have your will. If you don't have a will, you either choose. If you have the will made, it's you that chooses where the farm ends up. Otherwise, the solicitor who will decide. And all too often, the picture in the top right-hand corner again is where family breaks up and family problems over it. So to be fair, clarity with all family members, both boys and girls, and the persons receiving the farm and the people that will be looking after the older people down the road is very important. Young farmer, 35 years of age, the opportunities, young guys are getting farms too late, heading into their 40s and early 50s, getting a farm. The option of sort of looking at, bringing younger people in earlier, getting to learn the things earlier. And it's all about lifestyle and working, part-time working. The other side of things is leasing companies, partnerships. If you're paying tax, the option of a company is quite important. And if you don't want to give up farm, and maybe bringing a young person in along with you on a partnership has worked very well in cases. And the other option, if you're getting bet up and you're not able to do it anymore, the option to lease is a very, very attractive option, with tax savings on it. So again, I'd refer back to if you go into the Teagasc website, the public website, www.teagasc.ie, there's a superb succession webinar that's available to see there, and there's a booklet to go along with it. Finally, I'd just like to sum up by saying just what are the few things that you do. Do not let the next 2 weeks go by without making your plan. Write out your 6 or 8 goals that you have based on what we sort of highlighted there. And always remember the grape or the fork and the corner of the thing. Every time you pick it up this year, go back to the seminar and sort of say, are you still planning? Are you still measuring and monitoring? And finally, for people that's getting on in years or whatever, and even those people, anyone beyond 50 should have a will made, and at least you decide who's going to inherit the farm or where direction it's going to go. And finally, to lead on from these 4 areas that we talked about, Teagasc will be running a number of spring seminars on these 4 specific areas that will help you to sort of work through those individual issues that you have with it. So we look forward to working with the year ahead. Thanks very much, Sean.
Okay, Jerry, thank you very much. Thank you for that. And if you can stop sharing.
Yep.
That's great. Now I'll ask Emer and Charlie to come in there. And now look, we're moving on to the next part is just questions that have come in, and we'll ask Emer to go through this. So if you can unmute yourself there, Emer. And now, so we'll look at less than 10 minutes we have or so for this section. Look, and if you think of any more questions, keep them coming in there. Okay, Emer.
Yeah, geez, they were both great presentations, lads. So well done. We've plenty of questions coming in from them. I suppose we'll start with maybe Charlie. There was a few questions in about the minerals. Some farmers give mineral bolus and powdered minerals. Is there any harm in overfeeding these minerals?
Yeah, you need to be careful, Emer. If you're given a bolus, normally you wouldn't give minerals along with it, because there's an over. It's like everything in life, I suppose. You're trying to avoid, by giving them that you're trying to enhance the minerals that's there and improve it, but you don't want to overdo it either. That can cause issues as well. So one can be nearly as bad as the other. So just be careful, and it wouldn't be recommended, no.
Okay. Sticking with the minerals, can you get magnesium in a bolus for pre-calf?
It doesn't seem to be there available at the moment. And that's probably sometimes maybe the dust, maybe, you might be veering a little bit more towards the dust or the powdered mineral because it seems to have a better range. But I can see why people use the boluses. They're an awful lot handier from a labour and a work point of view,
Yeah. I suppose then moving on to the calf questions. What calving difficulty should the bull be for cows and heifers?
Well, ideally, I suppose, and that's something, I suppose, where you talk about a 12-month thing. So if you're trying to organise yourself for the year going forward, and a bit like what Jerry was saying there, is you kind of need a plan. But ideally, if you're using a bull, always less than 7% if you can on a mature cow, and try and have the reliability as high as possible. You'll get them there on ICBF. If you can have a reliability of over 90% with an AI bull or that, I know with stock bulls is a bit harder, but try and have the calving difficulty less than 7 for mature cows and less than 4 on the old system, say, for maiden heifers if you can at all.
Yeah, great advice. The normal temperature of calf when calving was one that came up there.
Normally, if a calf is thicker, that you're looking at about 38 to 39, we'll say Celsius, or I think it's 101 to 103 then Fahrenheit is the normal temperature if you're testing them to see if they're sick or whatever,
Yeah. You had a few questions that came in there about the grazing, I suppose. Does 2-year-old bales lose much of their quality, or older bales, I suppose?
Do you want to take that one, Jerry? Do you?
What you call it? Listen,
your microphone there. Jerry, pull down your microphone.
So just the 2-year-old silage is no problem so long as they're well wrapped and there was no soil involved. It's really mold growth on them is the issue around about them. So if there's no damage or holes in them, they're no problem. But if they were damaged at all, there's an issue with them. And if they were over dry and dry out, there can be an issue with the dry matter. But not essentially just avoid the molds. If there's any white molds on them, take it off. Don't feed them because of Listeria.
Yeah, very good. Staying with that, there was a question, Jerry, you can probably take this one again. In relation to making good quality silage, is there any evidence that extra wrapping helps the quality?
Well, the extra wrapping is just in relation to the preservation. You won't change the grass that's in the actual bale. So what you put into the bale is not going to improve in the bale. Fundamentally, the quality of the silage fully depends. Well, ultimately, it depends on what goes into it. If you have good grass going into it, quality grass without a seed head on it, you're going to make good quality silage. If you have a plant that's headed out, you're going to make inferior quality silage. The preservation is essentially around about then, it's converting the sugar into an acid and then preserving the grass. So if there's anything interferes with that preservation, bales will go off and go rotten all right, Okay, so you're trying to keep down the pH. So poor preservation raises the pH and it creates an issue.
Very good. Just going back to Charlie there.
Does that answer quick? Emma, you're looking.
Yeah, that's sound, Jerry. Thanks. Charlie, just about the 90% weight mentioned for calving down 2-year-old heifers. Was that for Jerry? Can you explain the 90% weight mentioned for calving down 2-year-old heifers?
Okay, so ultimately, like a heifer won't come to a mature weight until she's after a second calf. Okay, so what the target is in terms of getting those calves in calf is to try and work with a calf that's calving down, a heifer that's calving down at 90% of our mature body weight, or the mature body weight as a cow should be, right? So you're working backwards from that, and so when you're breeding her, you're aiming for to hit 60% at the time you're bulling her, like. So it's essentially working along. And that's the beauty of having the scales and having a weight in that heifer. And the majority of them heifers aren't hitting the 60% weight for breeding because they're not being fed well enough at the first winter, usually because the silage is inferior. And the other thing is that they're being left in sheds too long over the winter, gaining a half a kilo when they should be outside grazing spring grass and improving doing a kilo a day.
Very good. There's I suppose a lot of questions coming in about the grass and the soil. I think this might be for you again, Jerry. How much fertilizer should be applied on silage ground on old pasture for best results with index 3 soils for P and K?
Okay, so the ultimate thing in terms of old grasses is the nitrogen is the most significant factor, because old grasses can only handle 60 to 70 units of nitrogen. If your P and Ks are index 3, so you're only putting on a maintenance dressing of P and K just to carry over. And the key thing is that you're working with a limit of 18,612. If you have good quality slurry, it's adequate nearly in terms of your P and K. A bit of 10, 10, 20 on it of a bag, it'll be sufficient on the P and K and the things. And then you add your 60 units of nitrogen, whichever year you want to do it, maybe two bags of 27% nitrogen on it as well.
Good.
Just to say on that, the ryegrass obviously can handle 100 units of nitrogen, and the difficulty with a lot of people that grow ryegrass or grow a reseeded sward is that they don't put enough nitrogen on it, and it stops growing too early and then goes to seed when it gets stressed.
Good. About the plate meter, Jerry, did you mention something about plate meter available from Teagasc for grass measuring? If you could expand on that.
Yeah, okay. So the plate meter is a tool to measure grass. And I know that we have, there's people on the call there probably have them stuck in presses or whatever. Listen, they're huge tools and they're huge advantages in terms of utilising grass. So for people that are really interested in improving grassland and going that direction, you have the availability of pasture base there. It's probably a massive tool in terms of what's going forward. It's really why our dairy industry is really going as well as it is. And, on the beef side of things, if you're interested in making money, focusing in on grass and measuring grass and utilising grass is the key to going forward. And there's 18 or 20 of them round about, I think, that we have out in the countryside there. And if this guy's not using them, if we get them back, there might be guys on the call that might be interested in using them. Okay.
Very good. Thanks. Charlie, we'll go back to you. Someone just mentioned there, what's the best type of thermometer to use? Or would you have any?
Off my head, to be honest with you, I'd have no makes but an ordinary standard thermometer that you get in the co-ops, you can use them. There shouldn't be any huge difference because you're only measuring the temperature, so it's more the how you use it and the application of using it that'll be the most important,
Very good. And there was something there about if the calf grows 90% in the last 3 months, what you were talking about, Charlie. What will he grow in the last month? Was the question.
Yeah, I suppose what you're looking at here is that over the last 3 months, you're probably looking at 90% of a growth rate, something say between 80 and 90%, depend on, again, in the third month out, it isn't going to be as defined, and it's going to increase as the months go along. So you're probably looking at something as high as maybe 40%, 30% in the last month before the calf. And that's why you need to be awful careful if you're overfeeding your cow or a cow on very good quality silage. You're going to blow the calf up and you're going to lead yourself into an awful lot of trouble,
Very good. Someone asked there, just wondering, will the webinar be available to view again? Yeah, I think it will be on YouTube, Sean.
Yeah, we'll have the link up on our links there. So you'll see Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and we'll have it up there and it'll be available to view, yeah.
Very good. Back to Jerry there, just about the young farmer grants. Do you only get enhanced grants for 5 years, is the question. For Jerry.
Yeah, and the young farmer scheme, it's not that big of money, it's not. Yeah. Sorry. Well, either Charlie, myself, will answer it. Can you hear me, Emer? Yeah.
Yep. We're cool.
Yeah. Okay. So the young farmer scheme lasts for 5 years essentially. Yeah, and there's a top up and it's €80 a hectare. It's not hugely significant, but it's an advantage in terms of the old installation aid that was there. Guys were paid. They're paying it over 5 years, but you only get it for the 5 years. And if you have a herd number 2 or 3 years before you look and get your entitlements, you can only get it for the remainder of the 5 years from the time you got the herd number first.
Very good. Again, putting additive in silage, is this an option? Someone wanted to know.
Yeah, do you want to go, Jerry?
Go ahead, Charlie.
I suppose it's not much as it's not used as much as it was in the past. I suppose it depends very much on if conditions are good, there should be no great need to use it. Again, if conditions are very, very wet or very poor, that there may be an option to use it, but people are using it less and less. And what they're starting to use now is, I suppose, they're looking at the sugar level in the silage and they're taking advantage of that, we'll say, in the sunshine before it. So a lot depends on the circumstance at the time. There may be a place for it, but as I say, it's decreasing as time is going along,
Very good. Have we time for one more question, Sean?
Yeah, one more, sure. That's fine.
The grassland was very popular. This is again for Jerry. Someone said some paddocks have been closed since late September, dry land, and have good cover grass. Should I graze off the cover first in late February, early March, and then put on urea or fertilize before grazing?
Yeah, so listen, there's a huge area in terms of, we can learn so much from the dairy side of the house. Like they're closing from the early October and they're saving grass for the spring because that grass in the spring is higher energy. You're going to get a kilo a day weight gain on cattle in the springtime with it. So obviously, if that grass could be grazed, it's a huge addition if ground conditions allow, particularly on dry ground. The key thing will be getting out urea. You can spread urea from the 15th, which is this weekend, and anytime you get a chance for a bit of growth by putting out a bit of urea and that, it'll return, particularly if it's ryegrass. If it's not ryegrass, an old sward, just graze it and then look at maybe the first week and the second or third week of February putting out a bit of urea. Urea you're putting out essentially is a half a bag to the acre, and you're only putting it out for the recovery. It's not for the grass that's there at the moment, it's for the recovery, so that you have it in place when the grass starts growing.
That's grand. I think that's probably it now, Sean.
Okay, yeah. Great. Thank you very much for that, Emer. Look, we've come to the conclusion here of this evening's proceedings. So, look, thanks to Charlie and thanks to Jerry for presenting here on the webinar this evening, and thanks to Emer also, and also thanks to all of you who have attended and viewed the webinar this evening. Just want to highlight our next webinar is coming up on the 27th of January, again at 7 p.m, and we will be on the theme of environmental aspects. So we're looking at the promotion of the use of protected urea as opposed to standard nitrogen and urea that most farmers have been using up to now, and the benefits of that to the environment and also benefits to your own pocket. We'll be also looking at the promotion and encouraging farmers to use the low emissions slurry spreading technologies such as the trailing shoe and dribble bars as such. So look, that is for our next webinar. So the 27th of January at 7 p.m. Anyone who has signed up to this evening's webinar will receive an email about that ahead of the webinar. So again, thanks to all who have been involved in this evening, and thanks to everyone.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a bye.
Bye now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye now. Bye-bye.